The snow fell in thick curtains across the settlement of New Geneva, each flake catching the amber glow of the street lamps before dissolving into the growing drifts. The wind howled through the narrow alleys between the prefabricated buildings, carrying with it the bitter cold of an alien winter that seemed determined to freeze the life from everything it touched. In the heart of the human colony, where the buildings pressed close together for warmth and comfort, most residents had retreated indoors hours ago. Marcus Chun pulled his worn coat tighter around his shoulders as he worked late in his small workshop. The elderly toymaker's fingers moved with practiced precision, despite the arthritis that had been growing worse each passing year. Before him on the workbench lay the partially assembled form of a mechanical bird, its brass wings spread wide, and its tiny gears gleaming in the light of his desk lamp. It was his masterpiece, something he had been working on for months during the long colonial nights. The bird was no ordinary toy. Marcus had incorporated salvage components from the colony's defunct heating systems, creating a small but incredibly efficient thermal generator within the mechanical creature's chest. When wound, the bird would not only sing and flutter its wings, but would radiate gentle warmth for hours. He had planned to give it to Sarah, the daughter of the colony administrator, for her upcoming birthday. The little girl had been fascinated by his simpler toys, and he wanted to create something truly special for her. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows of his shop. Marcus paused in his work, listening to the storm. The weather reports had warned of a particularly harsh front moving through, but even the meteorologists seemed surprised by its intensity. New Geneva's climate control systems have been struggling all winter, and tonight they seemed to be losing the battle entirely. Marcus set down his tools and walked to the small window that looked out onto the main street. The snow was falling so heavily now that he could barely see the building across the way. The street lamps cast eerie halos in the swirling white, and the few remaining pedestrians hurried past like ghosts in the storm. He was about to return to his work when movement in the alley beside his shop caught his attention. At first, he thought it might be debris blown by the wind, but as he peered more closely through the frosted glass, he realized it was something alive. A small figure huddled against the side of his building, partially hidden by the overhanging eave that provided minimal protection from the elements. Marcus wiped the condensation from the window with his sleeve and looked again. His breath caught in his throat. It was a child, but unlike any child he had ever seen. Even through the swirling snow and dim light, he could make out scales that gleamed like polished obsidian, and what appeared to be small, folded wings pressed tight against the tiny back. The creature was clearly not human, and Marcus felt his heart skip a beat as he realized what he was looking at. The Drachmari were one of the few sentient species that humans had encountered since beginning their expansion into space. Unlike many first contact scenarios from old Earth fiction, the meeting had been largely peaceful. The Drachmari were an ancient race, their civilization spanning millennia, and they had observed humanity's emergence in a space with what could only be described as benevolent curiosity. They were magnificent beings, tall and elegant, with scales that shimmered in colors that shifted based on their emotions and the light around them. Their wings, when fully extended, could span 3 meters or more, and their intelligence was undeniable. But this was no adult Drachmari warrior or diplomat. This was a child, small and fragile, shivering violently in the alien cold. Marcus had heard that young Drachmari were particularly vulnerable to temperature extremes, their ability to regulate their body heat not fully developed until maturity. What was such a young one doing alone in a human colony during the worst storm in years? Marcus didn't hesitate. He grabbed his coat and rushed to the door, fumbling with the locks in his haste. The cold hit him like a physical blow as he stepped outside, the wind immediately trying to tear his coat from his shoulders. The snow stung his face as he made his way around to the side of his building, following the narrow alley where he had seen the small figure. She was still there, pressed against the wall where a small alcove provided minimal shelter. Up close, Marcus could see that she was even younger than he had first thought, probably equivalent to a human child of 7 or 8 years. Her scales were a deep purple-black, but they had lost their natural luster and appeared dull and lifeless in the cold. Her small wings were wrapped around her like a cloak, but they were clearly inadequate protection against the freezing temperature. Most heartbreaking of all were her eyes, large and golden, filled with intelligence and fear that no child should have to experience. "Hello, little one," Marcus said softly, kneeling down in the snow beside her. He kept his voice gentle and non-threatening, though he wasn't sure how much of his language she would understand. "Are you lost?" The Drachmarie child looked up at him with those enormous golden eyes, and Marcus saw recognition there. She understood, at least partially. Her small mouth opened, and she spoke in a voice that was barely above a whisper, her words heavily accented, but clearly in the human common language. "Cold," she said, the single word carrying a weight of misery that made Marcus's heart ache. "So very cold." "I know, sweetheart," Marcus replied, already beginning to remove his coat. "Let's get you warm." But as he started to wrap his coat around the small dragon child, she pulled back, shaking her head with surprising vigor despite her obvious weakness. "No," she said, her voice gaining a little strength. You will be cold. Humans need warmth too." Marcus was amazed by her consideration, even in her desperate state. Here was a child who was clearly suffering, yet her first thought was for his welfare. It spoke to something fundamental about the Drachmarie character that their young would show such compassion, even when facing death. "Don't worry about me," Marcus said firmly, continuing to wrap his coat around her small form. "I'm tougher than I look, and my shop is warm. Can you walk?" The child nodded slowly, though Marcus could see the effort it cost her. Her movements were sluggish, and he suspected that hypothermia was already setting in. Drachmarie physiology was different from human, but the effects of extreme cold were universal among warm-blooded species. Marcus helped her to her feet, keeping one arm around her to provide support. She was surprisingly light, her bones feeling almost hollow like those of a bird. As they made their way slowly back toward his shop, he felt her lean heavily against him, her small body trembling with each step. "What's your name, little one?" he asked as they reached his door. "Zara," she replied, her voice muffled by his coat. "My name is Zara." "Well, Zara, I'm Marcus, and you're going to be just fine." Getting her inside was a relief beyond measure. Marcus quickly locked the door behind them and led Zara to the small chair near his workbench, the warmest spot in the shop. The heating system in his building was old and inefficient, but it was infinitely better than the brutal cold outside. As Zara settled into the chair, Marcus got his first clear look at her in proper light. She was indeed very young, with the delicate features that marked Drachmarie children. Her scales, now that they were beginning to warm, showed hints of their natural iridescence, shifting between deep purple and midnight blue. Her wings, though small, showed the intricate membrane structure that would eventually allow her to soar through the skies of her homeworld. But what concerned Marcus most was her condition. She was clearly malnourished, her small frame more delicate than it should be. Her clothes were little more than rags, torn and dirty, offering no protection against the elements. Most telling of all were the small cuts and bruises on her exposed skin, suggesting she had been living rough for some time. "Zara," Marcus said gently as he busied himself making hot tea, "how long have you been outside?" The child was quiet for a long moment, her golden eyes focused on the mechanical bird on his workbench. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely audible. "3 days," she whispered. "Maybe 4. Time is hard to know when it is always cold." Marcus felt anger flare in his chest, though he was careful not to let it show on his face. What kind of situation had left a child alone in the wilderness for days during winter? The Drachmarie were known to be devoted parents, their family bonds incredibly strong. Something terrible must have happened for Zara to end up in such circumstances. "Are you hurt anywhere?" he asked, bringing her a mug of warm tea. "Besides being cold, I mean." Zara accepted the tea gratefully, wrapping her small clawed hands around the warm ceramic. She took a careful sip, and Marcus saw some color begin to return to her features. "No," she said after a moment. "Not hurt, just tired. And cold. Always so cold." Marcus nodded, relieved that she didn't appear to have any serious injuries. Hypothermia was dangerous enough without complications. He settled into his own chair across from her, cradling his own mug of tea. "Can you tell me what happened?" he asked gently. "How did you end up alone?" Zara's golden eyes filled with tears, and for a moment Marcus regretted asking. But then she began to speak, her voice steady despite her obvious pain. "My family. We were traveling to the new settlement on the northern continent. There was a storm, not like this one, but with lightning and terrible winds. Our transport crashed in the mountains." She paused, taking another sip of tea. "I was thrown clear when we hit, but the others, my parents, my little brother, the fuel caught fire." Marcus felt his heart break for the small dragon child. To lose her entire family in such a traumatic way, and at such a young age, was almost unimaginable. He wanted to reach out and comfort her, but he sensed that she needed to tell her story. "I tried to help them," Zara continued, her voice growing smaller. "But the fire was too hot, and the metal was twisted. I called and called, but no one answered. After the fire went out, I looked, but there was nothing left." "Oh, sweetheart," Marcus said softly. "I'm so sorry. I waited by the crash for a whole day," Zara went on. "I thought maybe someone would come looking for us, but no one did. I got hungry, and it started to get cold when the sun went down. I remembered seeing lights in the distance when we were flying, so I started walking." Marcus marveled at the courage it must have taken for such a young child to strike out on her own across unknown terrain. The mountains around New Geneva were treacherous even for experienced travelers, and the idea of a child navigating them alone was terrifying. "I walked for 2 days," Zara said. "I found some berries and a stream to drink from, but then it started snowing. I got lost, and everything looked the same. When I finally saw the lights of your town, I was so tired I could barely move." "How did you end up in the alley by my shop?" Marcus asked. "I tried going to other buildings first," Zara replied. "But when I knocked on doors, people would look at me through their windows and shake their heads. Some seemed afraid. One man opened his door and shouted at me in words I didn't understand, then slammed it shut again." Marcus felt a surge of anger at his fellow colonists. He understood that first contact with alien species could be startling, but to turn away a child in obvious need was unconscionable. The fact that some had been actively hostile made it even worse. "I was getting so tired and cold," Zara continued. "I found a little space next to your building and decided to rest for a while. I could see light in your window, and it looked warm. I was going to knock, but then I fell asleep, and when I woke up, it was snowing even harder." "Why didn't you knock when you woke up?" Marcus asked. Zara looked down at her tea, her cheeks darkening slightly in what Marcus realized was probably a drachmary blush. "I was afraid," she admitted. "The others had turned me away, and I thought maybe you would too. I didn't want to bother you." Marcus set down his tea and leaned forward, making sure Zara was looking at him. "Listen to me, Zara," he said firmly. "You're never a bother. Never. What happened to you should never happen to any child, and I'm ashamed of my neighbors who turned you away." Zara's golden eyes widened slightly at the conviction in his voice. "You don't mind that I'm not human?" she asked quietly. "Not even a little bit," Marcus replied. "You're a child who needed help, and that's all that matters." For the first time since he had found her, Zara smiled. It was a small, tentative expression, but it transformed her entire face. Despite her alien features, there was something universally childlike about that smile that made Marcus's heart warm. "Thank you," she whispered. Marcus smiled back, then stood up and moved to his workbench. The mechanical bird still sat where he had left it, nearly complete. An idea was beginning to form in his mind. "Zara," he said, picking up the bird carefully, "would you like to see what I've been working on?" The young drachmary's eyes immediately fixed on the brass and copper creation, her expression shifting to one of wonder. She set down her tea and leaned forward, studying the intricate mechanism with obvious fascination. "Is it alive?" she asked, her voice filled with awe. "Not exactly," Marcus replied, moving closer so she could get a better look. "It's a toy, but a very special one. Would you like to see what it does?" Zara nodded eagerly, and Marcus carefully wound the small key on the bird's back. As the mechanism engaged, the bird's wings began to flutter, and a sweet, melodic song filled the workshop. But, more importantly, Marcus could immediately feel the warmth radiating from the device as its thermal generator activated. "Oh," Zara gasped, reaching out tentatively toward the bird. When the warmth touched her scales, her eyes grew even wider. "It's warm. How does it make warmth?" "Magic," Marcus said with a wink, then immediately felt compelled to explain properly. "Well, not really magic. I used some parts from old heating systems to create a small thermal generator. When the bird sings, it also gives off heat." Zara stared at the mechanical creature with obvious delight, her small hands held out to catch the warmth it produced. The bird continued its song for several minutes before gradually winding down, its wings slowing and the melody fading. "That was beautiful," Zara said softly. "You made this." "I did," Marcus replied, feeling a surge of pride at her obvious appreciation. "I'm a toy maker. I create things that bring joy to children." "I've never had a toy," Zara said wistfully. "My parents always said they would get me something special when we reached the new settlement, but—" Her voice trailed off, and Marcus saw the sadness return to her golden eyes. Without thinking, he reached out and gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "Zara," he said quietly, "I want you to have this bird." The young Drachmarie looked up at him in shock, her mouth falling open slightly. But it's so beautiful," she stammered. "And it must be very valuable. I have nothing to give you in return." "You don't need to give me anything," Marcus replied. The bird was meant to bring warmth and happiness to a child, and that's exactly what it should do. Tears began to form in Zara's golden eyes, but this time they seemed to be tears of gratitude rather than sadness. "Are you sure?" she whispered. "Absolutely certain," Marcus said, carefully lifting the bird and placing it in her small hands. "But there's one condition." Zara looked up at him expectantly. "You have to promise me that you'll stay here tonight, where it's warm and safe. Tomorrow we'll figure out what to do next, but tonight you need to rest and get properly warm." "I don't want to be trouble," Zara said, though she was clearly exhausted. "You're not trouble," Marcus replied firmly. "You're a guest, and guests are always welcome in my home." As if to emphasize his point, he moved to a storage closet and pulled out several thick blankets. The shop didn't have a proper bedroom, but there was a comfortable couch in the small back room where he sometimes napped during long projects. "I'll set up the back room for you," he said. "It's not much, but it's warm and comfortable." As Marcus busied himself preparing a sleeping area for Zara, he found his mind racing. What was he going to do with a Drachmarie child? The colony had no infrastructure for dealing with alien refugees, especially children. There would be questions, bureaucracy, and probably complications he couldn't even imagine. But as he looked back at Zara, who was sitting in his chair holding the mechanical bird close to her chest with an expression of wonder and gratitude, Marcus knew that none of that mattered. What mattered was that a child had needed help, and he had been able to provide it. The rest would sort itself out somehow. "The bed is ready," he announced, returning to the main workshop. Zara looked up from the bird, which she had been examining with intense curiosity. "Marcus," she said softly, "why did you help me when the others wouldn't?" It was a simple question, but it cut to the heart of something fundamental about human nature. Marcus considered his answer carefully. "Because it was the right thing to do," he said finally. "Sometimes it's that simple. When we see someone in need, especially a child, we help. It doesn't matter what they look like or where they come from." Zara nodded solemnly, as if filing away this piece of information about humans for future reference. "Are all humans like you?" she asked. "No," Marcus admitted honestly. "Some are better, some are worse. But most try to do the right thing when it really matters. As he helped Zara settle into the makeshift bed, wrapping her in warm blankets, and making sure the mechanical bird was within easy reach, Marcus reflected on the strange turn his evening had taken. A few hours ago, his biggest concern had been finishing a toy for a human child's birthday. Now he was caring for a young alien refugee who had lost everything. But as he watched Zara's eyes grow heavy with exhaustion, her small form finally beginning to truly relax for the first time in days, Marcus felt a deep satisfaction that had nothing to do with finished toys or satisfied customers. This was what mattered, he realized. This moment of warmth and safety that he could provide to a child who desperately needed it. "Good night, Zara," he said softly, dimming the lights in the back room. "Good night, Marcus," she replied, her voice already thick with approaching sleep. "Thank you for giving me warmth." As Marcus returned to his workbench, he realized that Zara had given him something in return, though she probably didn't realize it. She had reminded him of why he became a toymaker in the first place, of the pure joy that came from bringing happiness to a child's life. And she had shown him something about the fundamental goodness that could exist between different species, the universal nature of compassion and kindness. Outside, the storm continued to rage, but inside his small shop, Marcus Chun felt warmer than he had in years. Marcus woke to the sound of gentle humming coming from the back room. For a moment, he was disoriented, unsure why someone else would be in his shop so early in the morning. Then, the events of the previous night came flooding back, and he smiled despite his stiff neck from sleeping in his workshop chair. The storm had finally passed during the night, leaving New Geneva blanketed in pristine white snow that sparkled in the early morning sunlight streaming through his windows. Marcus stretched carefully, his joints protesting after a night spent hunched over his workbench. He had stayed up far too late working on new projects, his mind too active after the emotional evening to allow for immediate sleep. The humming continued from the back room, a melodic sound that seemed to harmonize with itself in ways that human voices couldn't manage. It was clearly Zara, and she sounded much better than she had the night before. Marcus quietly made his way to the doorway and peered in. Zara was sitting cross-legged on the makeshift bed, the mechanical bird held carefully in her lap. Her scales had regained much of their natural luster, shifting between deep purple and midnight blue as the sunlight played across them. Most remarkably, her small wings were partially extended, no longer pressed tight against her body in a defensive posture. The fear that had dominated her expression the night before had been replaced by something approaching contentment. "Good morning," Marcus said softly, not wanting to startle her. Zara looked up with a bright smile that transformed her entire face. "Good morning, Marcus. Did you sleep well?" "Well enough," Marcus replied, though his next suggested otherwise. "How are you feeling?" "Much better," Zara said, then paused thoughtfully. "Actually, I feel wonderful. I haven't been truly warm in so long that I had almost forgotten what it felt like." She held up the mechanical bird, which was still radiating gentle heat from its previous winding. "Your gift kept me warm all night," she said. "I wounded again when I woke up. I hope that's all right." "Of course," Marcus said. "That's exactly what it's for." As he prepared a simple breakfast, Marcus found himself studying Zara more closely. In the clear morning light, he could see details that had been hidden by the storm and shadows the night before. Her scales weren't simply purple and blue, but contained flecks of silver and gold that caught the light when she moved. Her eyes, while clearly golden, had depths of color that shifted from amber to bronze depending on the angle. Most fascinating were her wings, which showed the intricate membrane structure that would eventually allow her species to fly. "Zara," Marcus said as he set out plates of simple fare, bread with preserves, and hot tea. "How old are you?" "I think I'm about 8 of your years," she replied carefully. Drachmarie aged differently than humans, but my parents said that was the closest comparison. "And you speak our language very well for someone so young." Zara's scales rippled with what Marcus was beginning to recognize as pleasure at the compliment. "My parents made sure I learned," she said. They said that if we were going to live among humans, I needed to understand their words and their ways. I liked learning about different cultures. As they ate together, Marcus found himself amazed by Zara's resilience. Despite everything she had been through, she maintained a natural curiosity and enthusiasm that spoke to the strength of her spirit. She asked questions about his work, his life in the colony, and human customs with the kind of genuine interest that made conversation a pleasure rather than an obligation. "Marcus," she said as they finished eating, "what will happen to me now?" It was the question he had been dreading, because he honestly didn't know the answer. New Geneva was a small colony, focused primarily on mining and agriculture. They had basic diplomatic protocols for dealing with adult drachmae, but nothing in place for a situation like this. "I'm not entirely sure," Marcus admitted, "but we'll figure out together. The first thing we need to do is let the authorities know you're here and safe." Zara's expression immediately became guarded, her wings pulling slightly closer to her body. "Will they send me away?" she asked quietly. "I won't let that happen," Marcus said firmly, though he wasn't sure how he could make such a promise. "You've been through enough. Whatever we do, we'll make sure you're safe and cared for." Before Zara could respond, there was a sharp knock at the front door of the shop. Marcus frowned, checking his timepiece. It was still quite early for customers, and most people would be dealing with storm cleanup this morning. "Stay here," Marcus told Zara softly. "Let me see who it is." Through the front window, Marcus could see two figures in the dark uniforms of colonial security. His heart sank slightly, though he tried to maintain his composure. Somehow, word of Zara's presence had already reached the authorities. Marcus opened the door to find Officer Patricia Reynolds, the head of colonial security, accompanied by a younger officer he didn't recognize. Reynolds was a stern woman in her 50s, efficient and by the book in all her dealings. "Mr. Chun," Reynolds said formally, "we need to speak with you about an incident last night." "Good morning, Officer Reynolds," Marcus replied, stepping aside to let them in. "What kind of incident?" "We received reports of an alien presence in the colony," Reynolds said, her eyes immediately scanning the interior of the shop. Several residents reported seeing what they described as a small drachmae in the alley behind her shop. Marcus felt his jaw tighten at the casual way she said alien presence, as if Zara were some kind of threat rather than a child in need. "That's correct," Marcus said simply. "I found a young drachmae child who was lost and suffering from exposure. She's safe now." "Where is the creature now?" the younger officer asked, his hand resting on what Marcus noticed was a neural stunner. "She is not a creature," Marcus said sharply, his voice carrying a warning edge. "She's a child, and she's under my protection." Reynolds held up a hand to forestall her companion, recognizing the dangerous tone in Marcus's voice. "Mr. Chun," she said more diplomatically, "we understand your humanitarian concerns, but there are protocols that must be followed. Any alien presence in the colony must be reported immediately and processed through proper channels." "Processed," Marcus repeated flatly. "Like cargo, like a potential security risk," Reynolds corrected. "We know nothing about this individual's background or intentions." "Her intentions?" Marcus could hardly believe what he was hearing. "She's 8 years old, officer. Her family died in a transport crash, and she's been wandering in the wilderness for days. What possible security risk could she present?" "That's not for you to determine," the younger officer interjected, earning a sharp look from his superior. Before the conversation could escalate further, Zara appeared in the doorway between the shop and the back room. She moved with careful dignity despite her small size, and Marcus noticed that she held herself with the natural poise that seemed to be inherent to her species. "I am Zara," she said formally, addressing the officers directly. "I believe you wish to speak with me." Reynolds and her companion both took an involuntary step backward. Marcus realized that for all their talk of protocols and security risks, they had never actually encountered a drachmae before, much less a young one. "You speak our language," Reynolds said, seeming genuinely surprised. "Yes," Zara replied patiently. "I was taught by my parents. We were traveling to the northern settlement when our transport crashed. I am the only survivor. Marcus watched as Zara recounted her story to the officers with the same quiet dignity she had shown the night before. Despite her youth, she displayed a composure that would have been impressive in an adult. The officers listened with growing unease, clearly not having expected such articulate communication from someone they had been thinking of as a potential threat. I understand that my presence in your colony may be concerning, Zara continued when she had finished her account. I did not mean to cause trouble. I was simply very cold and afraid. The younger officer looked distinctly uncomfortable, while Reynolds maintained her professional demeanor despite the obvious shift in her perception of the situation. Miss Zara, Reynolds said carefully, we appreciate your cooperation. However, there are still procedures that must be followed. We need to verify your story and determine what arrangements can be made for your care. What does that involve? Marcus asked. Standard protocol requires temporary detention while we contact the Drachmarie embassy and verify the details of the transport crash, Reynolds explained. It shouldn't take more than a few days. Detention? Marcus's voice was dangerously quiet. You want to put a traumatized child who has just lost her entire family in a detention cell? It's not a cell, the younger officer protested. It's a secure facility designed for situations like this. Officer Morrison, Reynolds said sharply, silencing her subordinate. She turned back to Marcus. Mr. Chen, we understand this is difficult, but regulations exist for good reasons. The child will be well cared for while we sort this out. Marcus looked at Zara, who was listening to this exchange with growing distress evident in her golden eyes. The thought of her being taken away to some sterile government facility after everything she had been through was intolerable. No, Marcus said firmly. Excuse me? Reynolds asked. I said no, Marcus repeated, moving to stand protectively near Zara. She's not going anywhere. She's traumatized, she's still recovering from exposure, and she needs stability, not more upheaval. Mr. Chun, Reynolds said, her voice taking on a warning tone, you cannot simply refuse to comply with colonial regulations. Watch me, Marcus replied evenly. The standoff stretched for several tense moments. Marcus could see Officer Morrison's hand move closer to his stunner, and he prepared himself for the possibility that this might escalate into something uglier. If I may, Zara said quietly, breaking the tension. All eyes turned to her as she stepped forward with careful grace. Perhaps there's a solution that serves everyone's needs. What do you suggest? Reynolds asked, clearly curious despite herself. I understand the need for verification and proper procedures, Zara said with a maturity that seemed far beyond her years. But I also understand that I have found safety and kindness with Marcus. Perhaps I could remain here while these procedures are completed? I give you my word that I will not attempt to leave or cause any trouble. Marcus felt a surge of pride at Zara's diplomatic approach. She was handling the situation with more grace than many adults would have managed. A Drachmarie child's word isn't legally binding, Morrison pointed out, earning disgusted looks from everyone else in the room. However, Reynolds said thoughtfully, there might be precedent for supervised custody pending verification. Mr. Chun, would you be willing to take formal responsibility for Miss Zara's welfare during the investigation period? Absolutely, Marcus replied without hesitation. There would be conditions, Reynolds continued. Daily check-ins, restricted movement within the colony, and full cooperation with the investigation. Marcus looked at Zara, who nodded solemnly. We accept your terms, he said. Reynolds studied them both for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Very well. I'll file the appropriate paperwork. Morrison, we need to get started on contacting the Drachmarie embassy immediately. As the officers prepared to leave, Reynolds turned back to Marcus with an expression that was almost apologetic. Mr. Chun, I hope you understand that we're not trying to be difficult. Situations like this require careful handling for everyone's protection. I understand, Marcus replied, though his tone remained cool. I just hope you understand that sometimes doing the right thing is more important than following procedures. After the officers left, Marcus turned to find Zara sitting heavily in one of his chairs, her earlier composure finally cracking slightly. "Are you all right?" he asked gently. "Yes," Zara said, though her voice was smaller than it had been during the confrontation. "It's just, I had hoped that the difficult part was over." Marcus knelt beside her chair, bringing himself down to her eye level. "Hey," he said softly, "it's going to be all right. I meant what I said about not letting them take you away." "But what if they insist?" Zara asked. "What if their rules say I have to go to their facility?" Marcus considered his answer carefully. He had made a promise, and he intended to keep it, but he also didn't want to make guarantees he might not be able to fulfill. "Then, we'll deal with that when it happens," he said finally. "But I have a feeling that once people actually meet you and see what you're really like, they'll realize how ridiculous it would be to treat you like a security threat." Zara managed a small smile at that. Her scales rippling with what Marcus was learning was gratitude. "Marcus," she said quietly, "why are you doing all this for me? I'm not even the same species as you." It was the second time she had asked a variation of this question, and Marcus realized that her experiences with other humans in the colony had left her genuinely puzzled by kindness. "Do you know what family means to humans, Zara?" Marcus asked. "I think so," Zara replied uncertainly. "People who are related to each other. That's one definition," Marcus said. "But there's another kind of family. Sometimes family is people who choose to care for each other, even when they're not related by blood. Sometimes family is about love and protection and being there for each other when things get difficult." Zara's golden eyes widened as she processed this concept. "You think of me as family?" she asked in wonder. "I'm starting to," Marcus admitted. "Is that all right with you?" Zara's response was to launch herself from the chair into Marcus's arms, hugging him with surprising strength for someone so small. Marcus felt his heart swell as he returned the embrace. This young being who had lost so much but still had so much love to give. "Yes," Zara whispered against his shoulder. "I would like that very much." As they held each other in the morning sunlight, streaming through the workshop windows, Marcus realized that his life had fundamentally changed in the space of a single night. He had always lived a quiet, solitary existence, finding fulfillment in his work, but never really understanding what he had been missing. Now he knew. He had been missing the profound satisfaction that came from being truly needed by someone else, from being able to make a difference in another being's life when it mattered most. Zara had given him purpose in a way that creating toys, however skillfully, never could. "Zara," he said as they finally separated, "would you like to help me in the workshop today? I could teach you about toy making." Zara's entire expression lit up with excitement, her scales shimmering with pleasure. "Really? You would teach me your craft?" "Of course," Marcus replied. "After all, if you're going to be staying here, you should learn how things work." As they settled in at the workbench together, Marcus began explaining the basics of his trade. Zara proved to be an eager and intelligent student, her natural curiosity leading her to ask insightful questions that often surprised him with their depth. "Why do you make toys that give warmth?" she asked as she examined one of his thermal mechanisms. "Because sometimes children need more than just amusement," Marcus replied. "Sometimes they need comfort or security, or just the knowledge that someone cares enough to create something special for them." Zara nodded solemnly, as if this was a profound truth she was committing to memory. "Like you did for me," she said. "Exactly like that," Marcus agreed. As the day progressed, Marcus found himself amazed by Zara's natural aptitude for the work. Her small clawed hands were surprisingly deft with delicate mechanisms, and her understanding of spatial relationships seemed almost intuitive. More than that, she approached each task with a reverence that spoke to her appreciation for the craft. "In Drakmori culture," she explained as she carefully polished a brass gear, "we believe that objects created with care and love carry some of the creator's spirit within them. That's why handmade things are so much more valuable than manufactured ones." "That's a beautiful way to think about it," Marcus said. "I've always felt that my toys have a little piece of my heart in them, but I've never heard it expressed so eloquently." As afternoon approached, They were interrupted by another knock at the door. This time, however, the visitor was Dr. Sarah Hendricks, the colony's chief medical officer, and one of the few people in New Geneva that Marcus considered a close friend. Sarah was a woman in her early 40s, competent and compassionate in equal measure. She took one look at Zara and immediately went into professional mode, though her manner remained gentle and non-threatening. "So, you're the young lady who has everyone talking," Sarah said with a warm smile. Zara looked uncertainly at Marcus, who nodded encouragingly. "I'm Zara," she said politely. "I'm Dr. Hendricks, but you can call me Sarah. Marcus asked me to come by and make sure you're healthy after your ordeal. Would that be all right?" The examination that followed was thorough, but gentle, with Sarah explaining everything she was doing as she checked Zara's vital signs and general condition. Marcus was impressed by how easily the doctor adapted her techniques to account for Drachmary physiology. "Well," Sarah announced when she was finished, "aside from being somewhat underweight and showing signs of recent stress, you're in remarkably good health. Your species is quite resilient. Is there anything special we should know about caring for a young Drachmary?" Marcus asked. "Actually, yes," Sarah replied, settling into a chair. "Their nutritional needs are somewhat different from humans, particularly their requirement for certain trace minerals that help maintain their scale health. I can provide supplements, and I'll give you a list of foods that are particularly beneficial." She turned to Zara with a more serious expression. "I also want to talk to you about something called survivor's guilt," she said gently. "It's very common for people who lose family members in accidents to feel guilty about surviving when others didn't." Zara's scales immediately shifted to darker hues, and Marcus saw her wings pull closer to her body. "It wasn't your fault," Sarah continued softly. "What happened to your family was a terrible accident, and there was nothing you could have done to prevent it or save them. The fact that you survived doesn't diminish the love you had for them or the grief you feel at their loss." "But I should have tried harder," Zara whispered. "I should have found a way to help them." "You were thrown from a crashing vehicle and survived alone in the wilderness for days," Sarah pointed out. "That takes incredible strength and courage. Your parents will be proud of how brave you've been." Marcus watched as tears began to form in Zara's golden eyes, and he realized that this was probably the first time since the crash that she had allowed herself to truly grieve. "It's okay to be sad," Sarah said, reaching out to gently touch Zara's arm. "It's okay to miss them and to cry for them. Grief is how we honor the love we had for those who are gone." What followed was a cathartic release that had been building since the moment Zara had realized her family was gone. She sobbed with the abandonment that only a child could manage, letting out days' worth of suppressed fear, loss, and confusion. Marcus held her throughout it all, offering what comfort he could while Sarah provided gentle reassurance. When the storm of emotion finally passed, Zara seemed smaller but somehow lighter, as if a tremendous weight had been lifted from her shoulders. "Thank you," she said to Sarah, her voice hoarse but sincere. "That's what friends do," Sarah replied simply. "And Marcus is right to keep you here rather than letting the authorities shuffle you off to some sterile facility. What you need right now is stability and affection, not bureaucratic processing." As Sarah prepared to leave, she pulled Marcus aside for a private word. "She's going to need time to process all of this," she said quietly. "There will probably be more difficult moments as she works through her grief. But she's remarkably resilient, and having someone who genuinely cares for her will make all the difference." "I do care for her," Marcus said. "More than I expected to, honestly." "It shows," Sarah replied with a smile. "She's lucky to have found you." After Sarah left, Marcus and Zara returned to the workshop, but the mood had shifted. The emotional release seemed to have left Zara both exhausted and oddly peaceful, as if she had finally begun to accept the reality of her situation. "Marcus," she said as they settled back at the workbench, "what happens if they can't find any other Drachmary to take care of me?" It was a question Marcus had been pondering himself, and one that filled him with both hope and trepidation. "I don't know," he said honestly. "But whatever happens, we'll face it together." Zara nodded, seeming satisfied with that answer. As the evening light began to fade outside the workshop windows, she curled up in her chair with a mechanical bird humming softly in her lap, and Marcus realized that somehow, in the space of 24 hours, his entire world had transformed. He was no longer just Marcus Chun, the solitary Toymaker. He was Marcus Chun, guardian and protector of a remarkable young being who had brought light into corners of his heart he hadn't even known were dark. And as he watched Zara drift off to sleep in the warmth and safety of his workshop, Marcus Chun began to plan for a future that looked very different from anything he had previously imagined. 3 weeks had passed since that snowy night when Marcus first found Zara, and the rhythm of their shared life had settled into something that felt remarkably natural. The colonial authorities had verified her story through diplomatic channels with the Drakmari embassy, confirming the transport crash and the loss of her family. What had surprised everyone was the response from the embassy itself. Marcus sat at his workbench, watching Zara carefully sand a small wooden figure she had been carving. Her technique had improved dramatically over the past weeks, and her natural artistic ability was becoming increasingly evident. The afternoon sun streamed through the workshop windows, casting warm light across her scales, which had fully regained their lustrous beauty. "The grain of the wood tells you which way to sand," Marcus instructed gently. "Follow the natural lines, don't fight against them." Zara nodded seriously, adjusting her technique. Her dedication to learning was remarkable, and Marcus often found himself amazed by her quick grasp of complex concepts. She approached each lesson with the same careful attention she gave to everything else in her life. A knock at the door interrupted their work session. Marcus looked up to see Officer Reynolds through the window, but this time she was alone and appeared less formal than during her previous visits. "Good afternoon, Officer Reynolds," Marcus said as he opened the door. "How can we help you?" "Actually, Mr. Chun, I have news," Reynolds replied, stepping into the shop. The response came back from the Drakmari embassy this morning. Marcus felt his heart skip a beat. Over the past 3 weeks, he had grown increasingly attached to Zara, and the thought of losing her filled him with an anxiety he hadn't expected. "What did they say?" Marcus asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Zara had set down her carving and was watching the conversation with obvious concern. Reynolds noticed her attention and addressed her directly. "Miss Zara, the embassy confirmed your identity and the details of your family's accident. I want you to know how sorry we all are for your loss." "Thank you," Zara replied quietly. "The embassy has also made a decision about your future care," Reynolds continued. "This is unusual, to say the least." Marcus braced himself for bad news, but Reynolds' expression wasn't entirely grim. Normally, in a situation like this, the embassy would arrange for you to be returned to Drakmari space and placed with relatives or in a community care facility, she explained. "However, they've reviewed the reports of your situation here, including statements from Dr. Hendricks and observations of your adjustment to human society." And Marcus prompted when she paused. "They've decided to allow you to remain here, if that's what you choose," Reynolds said, looking directly at Zara. "The embassy believes that forcing you to leave a stable, caring environment would cause unnecessary additional trauma." Marcus felt a wave of relief so powerful it almost made him dizzy. Beside him, Zara's scales brightened noticeably, shifting to the silver-tinged blue that he had learned indicated joy. "There are conditions, of course," Reynolds continued. "Mr. Chun would need to become your legal guardian under both human and Drakmari law. There would be regular check-ins to ensure your well-being, and arrangements would need to be made for you to maintain contact with Drakmari culture as you grow up." "What does that mean exactly?" Marcus asked. "The embassy will send cultural advisors periodically to help with your education about Drakmari history and traditions," Reynolds explained. "They want to ensure that you don't lose touch with your heritage while adapting to human society." Marcus looked at Zara, trying to read her expression. Her golden eyes were bright, but he could see the weight of the decision in them. "Zara," he said gently. This is your choice to make. What do you want? For a long moment, Zara was quiet, her small hands folded in her lap as she considered the options. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady and clear. I want to stay with Marcus, she said. He saved my life, and he's become my family. But I also want to learn about my people and honor my parents' memory by understanding where I came from. Marcus felt his throat tighten with emotion. In 3 weeks, this remarkable young being had shown more wisdom and grace than many adults he had known. Then, that's what we'll do, he said simply. The paperwork, as it turned out, was extensive. Over the following days, Marcus found himself navigating a bureaucratic maze that involved multiple government departments, the Drachmarie Embassy, and various legal entities he hadn't even known existed. But through it all, Zara remained patient and helpful, often serving as a translator when communications with the embassy became particularly complex. Human legal systems are very different from ours, she explained one evening as they worked through another stack of forms. Drachmarie law is based more on consensus and community agreement. Humans seem to need everything written down in great detail. It can be frustrating, Marcus admitted, but I suppose it also provides protection and clarity. Like your toys, Zara said thoughtfully. Every piece has to fit exactly right, or the mechanism won't work properly. Marcus smiled at the comparison. Zara had a gift for finding connections between seemingly unrelated concepts, something that made her both a pleasure to teach and a constant source of new perspectives. As the legal processes moved forward, word of Zara's situation began to spread throughout the colony. Marcus had expected some resistance or fear from his neighbors, but the response was surprisingly positive. Perhaps it was Zara's obvious youth and innocence, or perhaps it was the tragic circumstances of her arrival. But most colonists seemed to view her with sympathy rather than suspicion. Dr. Hendricks had been particularly helpful, providing medical documentation about Zara's health and adjustment. She had also begun teaching Marcus about Drachmarie biology and physiology, information that would be crucial as Zara continued to grow and develop. Drachmarie children go through several distinct growth phases, Sarah explained during one of her regular checkups. Right now, Zara is in what they call the grounding phase, where she's developing her basic cognitive and social skills. In a few years, she'll enter the awakening phase, where her flight capabilities and more advanced mental abilities will begin to manifest. Flight capabilities? Marcus asked, glancing at Zara's small wings. Oh yes, Sarah replied with a smile. Those wings aren't just decorative. Once she reaches the right developmental stage, she'll be able to fly. It's one of the most important milestones in Drachmarie childhood. Marcus tried to imagine Zara soaring through the skies above New Geneva and found the image both thrilling and slightly terrifying. She was already growing so fast, becoming more capable and independent with each passing day. One afternoon, while they were working together in the shop, Zara asked a question that caught Marcus off guard. Marcus, do you ever regret taking me in? Marcus set down his tools and turned to face her fully. Over the weeks, he had learned to recognize when Zara was dealing with deeper concerns beneath her usually cheerful demeanor. Never, he said firmly. Not even for a moment. Why do you ask? I've been thinking about how much your life has changed, Zara said, her scales shifting to the more muted tones that indicated thoughtfulness. Before I came, you lived quietly and peacefully. Now you have legal responsibilities, government officials visiting regularly, and a child to care for. Sometimes I wonder if you might be happier without all these complications. Marcus knelt down beside her chair, bringing himself to her eye level as he had that first night. Zara, he said seriously, my life wasn't peaceful before you came. It was empty. I didn't realize how empty until I had something meaningful to fill it. Taking care of you isn't a burden or a complication. It's the best thing that's ever happened to me. Really? Zara asked, her golden eyes searching his face. Really? Marcus confirmed. You've given me purpose and joy that I never knew I was missing. You've made me a better person just by being yourself." Zara's scales rippled with the silver highlights that indicated deep happiness, and she reached out to hug Marcus with a fierce affection that had become one of his favorite things about their relationship. "I love you too," she said softly. It was the first time either of them had used the word love, and Marcus felt something settle into place in his heart. This wasn't just about providing care for a refugee child anymore. This was about family in the truest sense of the word. As spring began to arrive in New Geneva, bringing warmer temperatures and the promise of easier times ahead, Marcus and Zara settled into a routine that felt increasingly natural. Zara had become not just his ward but his apprentice, showing a genuine talent for toy making that surpassed even Marcus's optimistic expectations. "I want to create toys that help," she announced one morning as they planned the day's work. "Like your bird that gives warmth, but for other needs that children might have." "What did you have in mind?" Marcus asked, intrigued. "Toys that help children who are afraid of the dark," Zara said thoughtfully. "Or toys that make music to help them sleep. Or toys that teach them about friendship and kindness." Marcus was struck by the depth of compassion in her suggestions. Despite everything she had suffered, Zara's first instinct was to help other children who might be struggling with their own challenges. "Those are wonderful ideas," he said. "Should we start working on some prototypes?" The project that emerged from their collaboration was unlike anything Marcus had created before. Together, they designed a series of companion toys, each designed to address a specific childhood need or fear. There was a small dragon that glowed softly in the dark, providing comfort to children afraid of shadows. A musical box that played gentle lullabies and projected soothing patterns on the ceiling. A set of figures that could be arranged to tell stories about friendship, courage, and kindness. But the most ambitious project was something Zara called a memory keeper. It was a complex mechanism that could record and play back short audio messages, allowing children to preserve the voices of loved ones or record their own thoughts and feelings. "Sometimes children feel alone even when people are nearby," Zara explained as they worked on the delicate recording mechanism. "If they could hear a parent's voice saying, 'I love you' whenever they needed it, they might feel less lonely." Marcus marveled at her insight. For someone so young, Zara had an almost supernatural understanding of emotional needs and how to address them through physical comfort objects. As word of their new toy design spread, orders began coming in from across the colony and even from other settlements. Parents who had heard about the therapeutic toys were eager to purchase them for their own children. Marcus found himself busier than he had ever been, but it was a good kind of busy, fulfilling work that felt genuinely meaningful. "We're going to need help if demand keeps growing like this," Marcus said one evening as they reviewed another stack of orders. "Could we teach other people to make them?" Zara suggested. "Maybe start a small workshop where people could learn the craft." The idea had merit, and Marcus began to seriously consider the possibility of expanding their operation. But more than that, he was amazed by Zara's instinctive understanding of business and community building. She wasn't just thinking about making toys, she was thinking about creating opportunities for other people to find meaningful work. One morning in late spring, they were interrupted by an unexpected visitor. A tall, elegant Drachmarie male stood at the door of the shop, his scales a deep emerald green that shifted to gold in the sunlight. He was clearly an adult, with fully developed wings that were folded gracefully against his back. "Excuse me," he said in accented but fluent human common. "I'm looking for a young Drachmarie named Zara. I understand she may be staying here." Marcus felt a stab of protective instinct, but he forced himself to remain calm. This could be the cultural advisor that the embassy had mentioned, or it could be something else entirely. "Who's asking?" Marcus said carefully. "My name is Kethvar," the Drachmarie replied formally. "I'm a cultural liaison from the embassy. I have come to meet young Zara and assess her well-being." From behind Marcus came the sound of quickly moving feet, and Zara appeared at his side. Her reaction to seeing another Drachmarie was immediate and complex her scales shifting through a rapid sequence of colors that Marcus was still learning to interpret. "Hello," she said formally in the Drachmary language, then switched to human common. "I am Zura." Kethvar's expression softened considerably when he saw her, and he responded in their shared language before switching back to common for Marcus's benefit. "I told her that she looks healthy and well cared for," he translated, "and that her parents will be proud of how strong she has become." Marcus watched the interaction with fascination. Despite having lived exclusively among humans for months, Zara immediately fell into what were clearly traditional Drachmary social patterns when speaking with Kethvar. There was a grace and formality to her movements that he had never seen before. "May I come in?" Kethvar asked politely. "I have much to discuss with both of you." The conversation that followed was one of the most important of Marcus's life. Kethvar was indeed a cultural advisor, but he was also something more. He was a specialist in cross-species child development, sent specifically to evaluate Zara's situation and provide guidance for her continued growth. "The embassy has been watching young Zara's progress with great interest," Kethvar explained as they settled in the workshop. "Her adaptation to human society has been remarkable, but we want to ensure that she maintains her connection to Drachmary culture as well." "How do we do that?" Marcus asked. "Education, primarily," Kethvar replied. "Drachmary children learn about their history, their values, and their place in the greater community through a combination of formal instruction and cultural immersion. Since Zara cannot return to Drachmary space regularly, I will be providing that education here." He turned to Zara with a gentle smile. "I understand you have been learning human crafts with great skill," he said, "but I would also like to teach you about Drachmary arts and traditions. Would you be interested in that?" "Yes," Zara said immediately. "I want to learn everything I can about my people." "Excellent," Kethvar replied. "We will start with language and history, but there are also Drachmary forms of artistic expression that I think you will find fascinating." As the weeks passed, Kethvar became a regular presence in their lives, visiting twice a week to provide Zara with intensive cultural education. Marcus was amazed by how quickly she absorbed the lessons, switching effortlessly between human and Drachmary modes of thinking and expression. Drachmary culture places great emphasis on the concept of flame keeping, Kethvar explained during one lesson. It is the idea that each individual has a responsibility to nurture and protect the things that bring warmth and light to the world. "Like Marcus does with his toys," Zara said thoughtfully. "Exactly like that," Kethvar agreed, smiling at Marcus. "The work you do together is a perfect expression of flame keeping. You create things that bring comfort and joy to others, particularly to children who need that warmth most." Marcus felt a glow of pride at the comparison. To know that their work was valued not just by human customers, but by Drachmary cultural standards as well was deeply satisfying. But perhaps the most significant development came when Kethvar announced that he had been in communication with other members of the Drachmary community about Zara's situation. "There are other Drachmary living among humans," he explained. "Not many, but enough to form a small community of cultural exchange. They have expressed interest in meeting Zara and welcoming her into their extended family." "Would that mean leaving here?" Marcus asked, trying not to let his concern show. "Not at all," Kethvar assured him. "These individuals live on various human worlds, pursuing their own interests and careers while maintaining their cultural connections. They simply want to offer Zara the opportunity to know others of her kind as she grows up." The first of these meetings was arranged for a month later, when a Drachmary artist named Silthara would be visiting the nearby star system. Marcus felt nervous about the encounter, but Zara was excited at the prospect of meeting another member of her species. "Do you think she'll like me?" Zara asked anxiously as they prepared for the visit. "She's going to love you," Marcus assured her. How could she not? As summer deepened and their small business continued to grow, Marcus often reflected on how dramatically his life had changed since that snowy night when he first found Zara shivering outside his door. What had begun as a simple act of compassion had blossomed into something richer and more complex than he could have imagined. Zara was no longer just a lost child in need of rescue. She had become his partner in both work and life, bringing fresh perspectives and boundless creativity to everything they did together. More than that, she had taught him about the true meaning of family, about the bonds that could form between beings regardless of their species or origins. "Marcus," Zara said one evening as they watched the sunset from the workshop window, "do you think my parents would approve of the life we've built together?" Marcus considered the question seriously. He had often wondered the same thing himself, whether he was honoring the memory of Zara's family or somehow replacing them in ways that weren't appropriate. "I think they would be amazed by the person you're becoming," he said finally. "You've taken their teachings about compassion and kindness and made them the foundation of everything you do. You found a way to honor their memory while still embracing new experiences and relationships. That's exactly what loving parents would want for their child." Zara leaned against his shoulder with the comfortable affection that had become natural between them. "I miss them every day," she said softly. "But I'm grateful for the family I have now, too." "That's the wonderful thing about love," Marcus replied. "There's always room for more of it. Loving new people doesn't diminish the love you had for those who came before." As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky above New Geneva, Marcus Chun and Zara settled into the peaceful rhythm of another evening in their shared life. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, and new chances to create things that brought warmth and light to a sometimes cold universe. But tonight, they were simply family, content in each other's company and secure in the knowledge that whatever the future might hold, they would face it together. 5 years had transformed everything, yet some things remained beautifully constant. Marcus stood at the window of what was now the Chinzura workshop for therapeutic toys, watching his daughter practice her flying techniques in the large open area behind their expanded facility. At 13, Zara had grown into a magnificent young Drachmarie, her scales now a brilliant sapphire blue with intricate silver patterns that caught the light as she moved through the air. The workshop itself had evolved far beyond Marcus's original small shop. What had begun as a 2-person operation had grown into a thriving business that employed 15 people and distributed therapeutic toys across the entire colonial sector. The success had surprised everyone, including Marcus himself, but it was built on a foundation that had never wavered. The belief that objects created with love and care could make a real difference in children's lives. "She's getting much better," came a familiar voice behind him. Marcus turned to see Dr. Sarah Hendricks entering the workshop, carrying her usual medical bag, but wearing the smile that had become increasingly common over the years. "The flying?" Marcus asked, returning his attention to Zara's aerial maneuvers. "Everything," Sarah replied, settling into one of the comfortable chairs they had added to the workspace. Her motor control, her confidence, her integration of human and Drachmarie social patterns. "She's remarkable, Marcus." Marcus felt the familiar glow of parental pride, though it was tinged with the bittersweetness that came with watching a child grow toward independence. Zara's development over the past few years had been extraordinary, even by Drachmarie standards. According to Kethvar, who had become not just a cultural advisor but a close family friend, she was exceeding all expectations for cognitive and emotional growth. "Sometimes I can hardly believe she's the same frightened child I found in that alley," Marcus said softly. "But she is," Sarah replied. "That compassion and resilience were always there. You just gave them a safe place to flourish." Through the window, they watched as Zara executed a particularly complex aerial turn before landing gracefully in the practice area. Her wings, now spanning nearly 2 meters when fully extended, folded against her back with practiced ease as she jogged toward the workshop. "Marcus," she called as she entered, her scales bright with the excitement that always accompanied successful flight practice. "Did you see that last turn? I think I'm finally getting the hang of the thermal management techniques that Kethvar taught me." "I saw," Marcus replied with a grin. "Very impressive. Are you ready for this afternoon's presentation?" Zara's expression immediately became more serious, though her excitement remained evident in the shimmer of her scales. "I think so," she said. "I've rehearsed it dozens of times, and the prototype is working perfectly." The presentation Zara was referring to was perhaps the most important event in their workshop's history. Representatives from the Interspecies Children's Welfare Council were coming to evaluate their latest innovation, a project that Zara had conceived and largely developed herself. The idea had come to her during one of her cultural education sessions with Kethvar, when they had been discussing the challenges faced by children of mixed species heritage or those who, like herself, were growing up outside their native cultures. "There are so many children who feel lost between worlds," she had explained to Marcus when she first proposed the project. "Human children living on alien worlds, alien children in human communities, even children whose parents are from different species. They need something that helps them understand that being different doesn't mean being alone." What had emerged from months of collaborative work was something they called the Unity Sphere, a sophisticated device that could project holographic environments representing different worlds and cultures. But more than just a visual experience, the sphere incorporated scent generators, sound systems, and even tactile feedback to create truly immersive cultural experiences. A child growing up on a human world could experience the singing crystals of Altair 7, Zara had explained to the design team. Or a human child living in Drachmary space could feel the thermal springs of Earth. It's not just about entertainment. It's about maintaining connections to heritage and identity. The technical challenges have been immense, requiring collaboration between human engineers, Drachmary technicians, and specialists from 3 other species. But the prototype that now sat in their workshop represented a breakthrough in cross-cultural education technology. Nervous? Marcus asked as Zara made final adjustments to the Unity Sphere settings. "A little," she admitted. "This could help so many children if it works out. I just want to make sure I explain it properly." Marcus reached out and placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder, marveling as always at how tall she had grown. Drachmary adolescents experienced rapid growth spurts, and Zara now stood nearly as tall as he did. "You'll be perfect," he assured her. "You understand this project better than anyone because you understand the need it addresses. Just speak from your heart." The representatives who arrived that afternoon were an impressive group, including officials from Human Child Welfare Services, a Drachmary cultural specialist, and a Zentori family counselor whose species had particular expertise in cross-cultural psychology. Marcus had met some of them before during various conferences and trade shows, but this was Zara's first time presenting to such a high-level audience. "Distinguished guests," Zara began, her voice steady despite the magnitude of the moment. "My name is Zara, and I want to tell you about what it's like to grow up between 2 worlds." What followed was one of the most articulate and moving presentations Marcus had ever witnessed. Zara spoke with eloquence and passion about the challenges faced by children who didn't fit neatly into single cultural categories, but she also emphasized the unique strengths that came from multicultural upbringing. "When I was very young and first came to live with humans, I felt like I was losing my Drachmary identity," she explained. "But what I learned over time was that I wasn't losing anything, I was gaining something new. I was becoming someone who could build bridges between different ways of thinking and being." She activated the Unity Sphere, and the room filled with the soft glow of a holographic Drachmary nursery, complete with the subtle thermal patterns that young Drachmary found comforting. "This isn't just about nostalgia," Zara continued as the projection shifted to show a human family gathering. "It's about helping children understand that identity isn't about choosing one thing or another. It's about embracing all the parts of yourself." The demonstration continued for nearly an hour, with the Unity Sphere showcasing environments and experiences from a dozen different worlds and cultures. But the most powerful moment came when Zara activated a special program she had created specifically for this presentation. The holographic environment shifted to show Marcus's original workshop on that snowy night 5 years ago, complete with the mechanical bird that had been her first gift. But Overlaid on this scene were thermal patterns that showed the emotional resonance of the memory, the way a Drachmarie would experience and remember such a moment. "This is how I remember the night Marcus saved my life," Zara explained, her voice soft with emotion. "It's not just the visual memory of what happened. It's the feeling of warmth and safety and love that came with it. The Unity Sphere can help children from any culture understand and share experiences like this." Marcus felt tears gathering in his eyes as he watched his daughter.